Here we go. Roll video.
I think anybody creating something new must have an adventure.
It's not cinema, it's something else.
My advice to a young filmmaker is to make a movie every week.
The whole bag of movies can be learned in about a day and a half.
But suspense is essentially an emotional process.
You gotta make films. You gotta make it and get it seen.
Cinema for me is a world of when I dream.
Welcome to Behind the Slate. I am your host, Aaron Strand, and I am so excited to kick off our journey into the world of micro-budget filmmaking with one of its greatest champions. Noam Kroll is an award-winning filmmaker, podcaster, and educator. Now, I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that he is one of, if not the greatest teachers of filmmaking in the world today. Through his social media channels, his weekly newsletter, and his blog, he has spent over a decade creating a literal treasure trove of resources, tutorials, product reviews, how-to guides, literally everything you need to be an independent filmmaker, and he provides it all completely free at noamkroll.com. Now, in addition to all this, Noam hosts a podcast, Show Don't Tell, which is dedicated to micro-budget filmmaking, in which he not only talks about his own work, but interviews independent filmmakers from all over the world. And if that wasn't enough, he is also an incredibly talented and innovative filmmaker. He shot his most recent feature film, Disappearing Boy, as a one-man crew. It looks absolutely gorgeous, and he documented how he did it through his blog and podcast. I am incredibly honored to welcome on the show Mr. Noam Kroll. Noam, how are you doing today?
I'm great. Thank you so much again for the super generous intro, and just so excited to be here and talk to you and be on your amazing show.
Oh my God! Let me just start off by saying I am a huge fan. In case you couldn't already tell, I was introduced to your blog in 2014.
Oh, wow. Oh, so you've been following it for a while.
And it was that time was right when I began my shift from being primarily an actor to becoming a self-taught filmmaker. I think at the time I was deciding whether or not to purchase a GH4.
Okay. Yeah, that sounds about right.
so it definitely feels like a million years ago. And, after that first article, I added noamkroll.com to my bookmarks bar. It has been there ever since. And it's just been such an amazing resource. I want to start off by asking, what was the creative impetus for you to start the blog all the way back? Was it 2012? Is that right?
Yeah, I technically started it in 2012. I actually almost started blog in like 2010, and I didn't really know what to do with it. And then I really did it in 2012. But it started because a couple of things. Like I discovered a few blogs at the time that were just so helpful for me. And I just thought, like, these are amazing. I'm learning so much, and I could kind of look behind the scenes a little bit and tell that the bloggers were, building also like a good creative career for themselves by having a platform and having an audience to showcase their work with. And I just thought like that was so cool that they were doing that, but I didn't really think much about, like, I had no business plan. I wasn't trying to like collect emails from people or any of this stuff. Like now that's I've turned it into a bit more of a strategy, but back then it was just, I just want to share stuff and hopefully people will find it interesting or helpful. And then another big part of it was I'm from Toronto, Canada originally, and I was trying to move here to LA. And just to have any sort of like visibility online, I thought would be an asset. So for me, a big part of having the blog was just, if I meet someone and they search my name, I just want something to show up so I could get hired for something or whatever. So it really didn't start as like, this is going to be a core part of like my career or anything. It was just, I thought it would just be this thing I did on the side. And it kind of like grew to be a big like cornerstone of like the, whole filmmaking kind of model that I'm following, at least for now. And then it's grown into like the podcast and things in more recent years. But yeah, that's cool. You've been following since then, because it's also evolved a lot. Like 2014, at the beginning, I was like more camera heavy. And then my interest changed, I just start talking more about like story or filmmaking or like whatever, like anything that I find interesting that's not just gear. And some people didn't like that as much. Other new people came on, but I'm glad to hear you're one of the people that sort of, has been around for a while. That's cool.
Now, going even further back in your own story, is there like a light bulb moment for you when it comes to micro budget filmmaking? Was there a movie that you saw that inspired you, or a director you worked with that was like, this is the path I want to pursue?
No, that's a great question. I don't think there was any one moment. I think it's a combination of like two things. I think like it was like almost like a something that teed it up and then something that kind of followed through. So I think the tee up is just my natural kind of wiring as a person. I always was just very DIY with everything. Like if I did anything that I liked, if I went to like a play as a kid, I would like go and recreate the play at home. Or if we went to Disneyland, I'd try to like build the rides in my house. Or like I was just trying to DIY my way into like recreating experiences and things that I liked. And then so when I was interested in filmmaking, like I never even thought about like that there was a right way to make films or that I should learn how to make films, which like maybe that would have been better if I did. But the way that I was like kind of wired and am, it's just like, oh, like, that's cool. Like, let me ask myself how to do that. And I would try whatever like method it was that made sense. Like, okay, well, you need a camera to make a film, so where can I get a camera? Like I need an actor, like how do I get an actor? I'll ask one of my friends. So it was just born out of like this DIY spirit. So that was sort of like teeing it up. And I think like in terms of movies that I saw, like there were movies that I saw later that sort of reinforced that this is a viable path to be on. And the one like I brought up many times, and it's funny because it's not that it's like my favorite movie of all time, although I do really like the movie. But it was more just that it hit me at the right moment. There was this movie, Another Earth, that came out like probably around 20, I don't know, like 20. I actually don't remember the exact year, 2010 maybe, or 2011. I'm probably getting that wrong, but anyway, it was done for like $50,000. It went to Sundance. It did really well. Britt Marling was part of the team behind it, and she was in it, and it was this great movie. And I saw it in the theater. And I'm like, this is what I'm talking about. Like these people are making a movie that goes to Sundance with $50,000. It's going like I'm seeing it in Toronto at this like great theater at the Tiff Bell Lightbox, and like people are discussing the movie. And like to me, if something can be done like that and then it reaches that many people, like that has more excitement in it to me than just somebody that had $100 million and they could pay to advertise to enough people to go see the movie. Like I loved those movies that beat the odds. So I think once I started seeing movies like that were actually doing it, it just kind of reinforced, you know what, like, yeah, I should follow my instincts, not because that's the only path, but that's the path that I'm already on. So, and it's a viable path. So why not, try to continue that as much as possible?
I definitely relate to sort of that just natural curiosity that has, for better or worse, led me down this path. I'm curious, whether as on your journey as a independent filmmaker or on your journey with on your blog as an educator, have there been moments of doubt along the way? Have you had moments where you're like, oh man, like maybe I should just try to go, work at an agency, or where
Yeah.
you get like
Every single day, like literally every single day of my life. Like before this call, there were things I was thinking about where I was just like, but that's why I try to talk so much to other filmmakers, especially now that like I have, a modest sort of audience, and there are people that thankfully, have responded well to some of the stuff I've been putting out. And they think that like, I just never want to share the impression that like it's all easy, or that like I don't struggle with this stuff either, because the truth is that like I very much do. And the only reason I've achieved anything that I have is because like I'm so fearful of not achieving things, that like the only option is just to keep going and keep trying and keep working through those moments of self-doubt. But like that never goes away. Like I do not feel any different today than I did when I first started, other than that I've learned things. I feel like I can do things more quickly, and I can hopefully I've grown a bit as like an artist, or how I communicate with people and things like that. But like, I definitely, on every level, feel doubt. And that's again why I try to like tell people like, I know for a fact, like, people way above my level are doubting themselves every day. So, like, don't think because you doubt yourself and you're just starting that that means you're not a good filmmaker. That just means you probably are a better filmmaker than somebody that has no self doubt and no self awareness, that, like, they might just think everything that they do is great, and it's never great. So you have to, you do need a little bit of self doubt almost, but not so much that it becomes detrimental.
One of the things that I admire most about your work and that I've just always loved is that, quality is sort of like just the base level, it's like the given. And from there, you do this incredible job of sharing and communicating and promoting what you're doing. And, I think a lot of, creative people, myself included, really struggle to kind of like put themselves out there. And I think for me, it kind of comes from a fear of being perceived as inauthentic or
Hmm.
self-serving somehow. And honestly, this podcast has been kind of the first thing that has forced me to really work on that. And I've looked to you as someone who, opens themselves in a really authentic way, like into their creative process. And like, even just what you're doing just then of like, yeah, dude, I have doubts every day. And like, how do I get out of it? I talk to other people. I mean, like, that's amazing. How have you kind of approached that as a part of your craft and your work, that authenticity?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, like, how have I sort of actually put that into practice? You mean in terms of,
Yeah, or
yeah.
even just whether it's the mental practice of
Hmm.
kind of like sustainability, keeping these like all of your educational stuff like going,
Yeah.
or when it's time to shift into a feature film. And
Yeah.
yeah, like kind of, I don't know, how do you continue to bring yourself to the work?
Yeah, I think, I for me, it's just it's always following the creativity behind it. I think is that the thing that I'm excited by, whether I'm like doing, just to give total opposite. So like whether I'm just, planning for like boring kind of business stuff, and like, you know, what products, can I make, or what commercials can I do with my production company or whatever, which isn't like super boring, but it's a lot more boring than like writing a script for a movie or something where it's a little bit more cerebral. So, when I look at like things that are on the total opposite, I still am always following the creative spark. So like, I have to plan for business stuff, but like, how much can I tap into my creativity in that? Like, can I try to think of like innovative new tools or educational resources or things that I think that would be like really helpful in not only in growing my business, but also in just filling a need for something that's not there. And I think like basically everything we do can be an act of creativity. And if we see it that way, then everything can kind of be enjoyable and feel purposeful. So that makes me tie a lot of things together. And even though I'm doing all of these different things, I have a podcast, a blog, and I'm making films, and I have a company and whatever, but the truth is they're all in my head the same thing, and they're all coming just from a place of like, these are just organic branches that are kind of growing off of my creativity, and therefore, I can kind of fluidly go from like, one day I'm in Cinecolor and I'm designing color correction tools, and the next day I'm writing a script, because I understand sort of the way that they're connected, if that makes any sense.
Absolutely. And I think it is another skill that anybody thinking about pursuing independent film will need to embrace, or really, I think any creative person, maybe any person. Maybe I'm being a little too artist centric, but this idea that you have to juggle all these things, and like you were saying, shifting from like, okay, business mind to creative mind to technician to recruiter to to
Yeah.
team leader, whatever. And I mean, and then of course there's the personal side to it too, of like switching to family, like
Yes. Yeah.
I have a young daughter, like, who like needs a
Yeah.
dad,
I have two now. So yeah, I get it. Yeah, it's a whole other.
it is a real challenge to be able to navigate these different roles. And because really, like, the idea of this whole career is like that it's supposed to be a long game, like
Mhm.
it's the sustainability that leads to success. I want to believe, so
Totally.
how do you I mean, is it that the sense that everything is coming from the same creative tree, that kind of like that unification that you feel that kind of like allows?
I think so. Yeah, because I just think of it as like everything that I do. Like if I'm just playing with my 3-year-old, almost 4-year-old son, it's like that could be, if I'm not using my creativity, like that experience won't be meaningful for either of us. But if I'm building a fort with him and we're like, play fighting and whatever we're doing, it's like that's actually so rewarding for me, and it builds up my creative energy, and it is important time to not be spent on like working on a film or something like that. Just like if I'm doing something that's like to build my business, where, of course I'd rather be on set directing or something than just figuring out like the nitty gritty of my accounting or whatever it might be on that day. But I can still like understand the purpose of it, because I know if I do this, this is what I need to do to pave the way to be creative and to have the time to then make a film. So I think it's just, a lot of it, it just comes from that place. And I think that like, I just try to like not wall off. I used to really wall off the different things. Like, okay, today I'm working on this, and from these hours I'm focused on that. And I'm trying to now just think of everything like my to-do list. I don't even separate my business to-do list and my personal to-do list, because it's just my life, just like my work day never ends, but my personal day also never ends. Like if I get a call from my son's school, like that will take priority over work. But some nights, if it's like a movie night and I have to work, then I can open my laptop and sit there and get work done. So it's, for me, it's less about like being rigid, and it's more about having this open-minded attitude that like I understand the core fundamentals of like what I should be doing, what needs to get done, what's important. And then I just need to embody that in every moment, and not feel like, I have to do X, Y, or Z just because I put it on the schedule, but just understand like why I'm doing things. And then hopefully the right decisions and actions will kind of come out of that.
I think that's so important. And I really appreciate you sharing that, because even though like I live it, I'm also very susceptible to like the myth idea of what a filmmaker's life is supposed to look like. Like
Yeah.
I have all these like fantasies in my head of like what it should be looking like.
Yeah.
And without talking to other people and like hearing from other people like what they're doing, I will be comparing my life to some imagined idea in my head, and then using it to like make me feel worse about myself, or like how I'm not just doing something right. It's
We
like
all
crazy.
do that. And I know better, but like we all do that. And the truth is, like, unless you've made some like $1 billion franchise movie and you're just like on a whole other level, or you're Peter Jackson or something, like your life is this is something I talked about recently on, I think, on Twitter, and also just like on a newsletter. But this idea of like how people actually make their money as filmmakers, like there's this illusion that you're just paid all of this money, but like filmmakers that have made movies that we all love and respect, and that have premiered at like Venice and all these big festivals, and a lot of them are like still teaching film. They're professors, or they have a restaurant that they own, or they work some other arrangement, or their spouse is also working. And there's, everybody has to figure it out. And like this is not an industry where like box office success means like the writer director is necessarily getting all that much money, unless it is a like astronomical hit, and they have a lot of kind of leverage in their deal and contract for that movie. So yeah, I think it's important just from a practical sense for filmmakers to understand that it's totally normal. Like, yes, like this sort of day job of like a celebrity director might be in its, more glamorous than someone who's just like getting started, but it's really the same thing. It's about the idea that this person is having to do something in between making films. And that like when you see it that way, then you don't, I think going back to like second guessing yourself, it helps you to, or at least for me, to not second guess myself as much, because then you don't think, well, maybe my lifestyle is an indication that like I shouldn't be a director, because I don't just get paid to direct movies all day. But like pretty much nobody does, like,
Yeah.
and most of the people we love don't, right? So I think when you see it that way, it can help frame it in a more positive light.
I love that. And I think it ties into this other thing that I kind of wanted to bring up, which is something you certainly champion, and something that I believe very deeply, which is that, and it's also a way that I think art is like a model for living, in a way. And it's this, this faulty belief that, oh, if only I had XYZ, then I would be so happy if I had the perfect job, or the perfect car or whatever. And then for filmmakers, it's if only I had $1 million budget, if only I had an Ari Alexa, then I could make my movie.
Yeah.
And these thoughts are just like not true.
Yeah.
And having more stuff also doesn't necessarily mean you're more creative. And it's
Exactly.
the limitations and restrictions of a process that lead to creativity. How did you kind of learn to embrace this idea?
Well, I think again, it's almost like the other question, or like at the very beginning of this interview, where I said it was almost like a two-part thing, where I think part of it is like the natural, that's just how I operate, and then part of it is experiential. But I think that um yeah, as you get older, you just start to see more things, and you start to have conversations with other filmmakers, and you make your own films, and you start to learn how things are actually done. And when you're first starting, at least from my experience, I made a lot of assumptions that were just totally incorrect. So even though I kind of had a certain, bias toward, working a certain way, or feeling a certain way about like indie film and lower budget stuff or whatever, like, I still bought into a lot of the kind of ideas of like, what it's supposed to look like or what path you're supposed to take. But I realized that like, as I get older, I think the clarity that I've gotten is that most filmmakers, I think most artists, and probably like your example before, like most people, maybe it applies to, but most of us are just very, very, very afraid of failure, of success, of something, of ridicule. Like there's something that all of us are horribly afraid of. And a lot of people that are very afraid of things go into the arts because creativity is an outlet for your fears and for your traumas and all of these things. So it can be a very positive thing in that way. But then to think of exposing that to the world and then putting a dollar value on that, especially in the case of film, where like, oh, this thing that's so meaningful to me, like somebody doesn't want to give me money for it. Like that's not just an indication of the project not being meaningful, but that's saying like I have no value. And I don't think people are consciously aware that. I think it is a complete subconscious thing that's happening kind of, underneath the surface. But I do think that people, it masquerades as, oh, I need more money, I need a name actor, I need the perfect set of circumstances, because movies have, successful movies have been made under every circumstance, from no budget to $100 million budget, from people doing it with a big crew to a small crew. So it's not that there aren't challenges, but it's possible pretty much under any circumstance, other than a handful where someone legitimately is, I could see, there's a single mother with multiple kids and she's working 3 jobs. And like, I understand there are people, but I think a lot of the people, especially film students who like have access to gear, they have all the time in the world, they have friends that want to work on their movie for free, and they're still resisting doing it. It's like, but why? Like, what's the alternative to, if you're not going to do it now when it's as easy as it'll ever be, then you're not going to do it when you're like 35 or 40, when you have kids and, it's harder. Right. So, yeah.
Totally. Oh man, yes,
Yeah.
I deeply relate. Having waited to have a child until I actually go ahead on my first feature, I can. It hurts to hear. But
No. But here's the thing: is I think it makes you, if you're someone like yourself who's going ahead with it, anyway, it actually makes you a better filmmaker, I think, to have kids. And it makes you understand, it makes you more empathetic. I think it makes you understand the value of time, and you're more purposeful with your, for me at least, like I feel like that has been a huge factor in just my creative growth, is like having this totally different perspective now that I didn't have before. And it's not about like if you do something before you have kids or after. It's just more about like, most people aren't probably, I can't say for most people, but I would guess that most people wouldn't, are much less likely to do what you're doing, where you haven't made a film yet, you have a family, and then you're still able to will yourself to do it, which is a very hard thing to do. But yeah, for people that like are younger listening to this and they're like 19, 20 years old, yes, you have all the time in the world, but at the same time, like all time is not equal. So just try to, do it while you have the freedom to experiment on the easiest level possible, because as you get older, like things become more expensive, and you can't do it in the same way, without doing something crazy like I did and like shooting a movie by yourself. But like you can have like a full crew as a student and make a feature film that looks amazing with your friends and with gear you get from your school for free or wherever. So I just, yeah, I mean, I feel like everybody should be doing it, especially the younger people.
Yes. And if we are speaking to the 19 and 20-year-olds out there, and I'm just going to pretend that I'm speaking to my 19 or 20-year-old self,
Yeah.
I think it's everything that you said, with a slight caveat of, if it's not like winning awards at Sundance, or if it just even straight up sucks, like that's okay too. Like that doesn't
Yes.
mean you suck, which I think was, like you said, like the fear of failure was such a dictating force, and it still is. It was debilitating when I was younger.
Yeah. And I think the best thing that happens to someone with a fear of failure is that they fail and then they see that it's not that bad, and then they just go again. And like it's this idea of like the first film, like the first feature you make, we all put so much pressure on it, because we see, we think of like, oh, okay, what did Spielberg do first, or Tarantino, and like it has to be, and then we get in our heads about like what the film has to be, and that prevents so many people. That itself prevents so many filmmakers from actually making something. And then, and I felt those things too. Like I made a whole feature film that went to festivals that I just didn't release, and don't even consider like part of my body of work, because I just shelved it because I didn't think it was like up to my standards for being a feature film at the time. And then I shot another feature after that and I didn't finish it. And then I made the feature Shadows on the Road that I released. And even when I released that, I felt like, well, this isn't, I know this isn't perfect. And I didn't realize until later that every movie is imperfect, and that everything you do, you feel like there's the stuff you love about it, and there's the stuff where you're like, this is the best version of it I could have made. Now I have to see what other people think. And there's never a moment where you just feel like, oh, I made the perfect movie, I can't wait for everybody to see it. I mean, there's like I think like Quentin Tarantino is like one director that talks about, like, I think he's kind of that guy, but that's very rare. Most people are pretty, worried about like their work and their perception of it and all of that, and critical. Like we're all our own worst critics. So, but once I put that out there, and some people really liked it, some people didn't like it. I got a couple of good reviews. I got some festivals we got into. I got some we didn't get into. And I realized like, oh, okay, like that's like the worst case scenario, is that like my film does like, reasonably well given how we made it. It just didn't become like an Oscar winning film. Like, and now I'm so many steps ahead of where I was before. And then like within, 3 months of finishing, or not finishing, but like releasing that film, like I was already on set for the next film. And then, the pandemic hit, so that slowed me down. But now I've done the one after that. So like but before that film, there was like a 5-6 year period where like I was just thinking about making a feature and I didn't do it. And as soon as I broke the ice of making something and then having it just be what it was going to be, then I was like, okay, now I don't care. I can just keep working and I kind of get how it's supposed to go now.
That's amazing. And the one thing that popped into my head was talking about, the few filmmakers who are like, yes, like I've made it perfect. I think there's this other side to that, which is like, I think it's Wong Kar-wai talks about making In the Mood for Love, in the moment realizing like, I'm never going to make anything better than this. And the depression and like the horrible burden that like came along with that, right? Like the filmmaker's dream, right? You make this like unadulterated masterpiece. And as an individual, you're like, where do I go from here?
Yeah.
Like,
no, it's true. It could be it very well be the best thing you've ever done, and you'll never know. But it could also not. And I think that's the beautiful thing about creativity is like you almost like that part's out of your hands. So when you stop worrying about it, then you can just create stuff, put it out there, and it will naturally get better because you're going to learn skills. You'll, if you keep doing it, you're going to become a better artist. You're going to tell stories that are more meaningful to you and do things that are, just more, that hopefully will connect to bigger audiences. But then, you might make 10 films and 9 of them do so, but like one of them just pops off. And if you think of it, like that's like musicians, right? Like there's the one hit wonder bands, but then there's also like most musicians that they put out an album and like some of the songs are pretty good, but like it's the one hit song from that album that makes them a superstar. And like they have the ability to put out so many songs because there's a smaller sort of barrier to entry than there is for filmmakers. But in the same sense, filmmakers can be following that idea of like just putting out like singles or like short films or albums or features, just like keep putting them out and keep doing it over and over and over again. And eventually it's going to be the right movie at the right time and something is going to pop. And if it doesn't, it'll be up to you to decide if you want to keep doing it or not. Like nobody has to keep making films, but I think once you've made a few, it's kind of addictive and it's like it's hard to stop, for some filmmakers at least.
I certainly relate. I shot a feature in 2016 that I then spent 3 years editing and never finished.
Yeah.
And like it just, it just didn't come together. And like you said, it wasn't up to my standards of what I thought I was supposed to be. And yeah, it's felt like, I mean, that was like definitely one of the hardest moments of like my creative life. But also the addictive quality of like, I got to get back has, driven me ever since. So yeah, it's
okay though. It's because there's two sides, if you don't mind, like just to add to that, like I think there's two sides to abandoning a project. There's good reasons to do it too. So like, I don't think people should abandon when just because something gets hard, because I've done that and I've regretted it where I'm like, oh no, like I thought there was something fundamentally wrong because it wasn't easy, but it's not supposed to be easy. And now I know that. But at the time, I thought it was not a good movie or whatever, not a good script. So there's that side. But the other side is like the sunk cost bias thing that like I've talked about a lot on like Twitter and stuff. But like this idea that just because you've put in 4 or 5 years of time into something, like, does that mean you need to put in another 2 years if it's not going the way that you want it to? Like if you forget about like the weight of like what you've already done and you're only looking ahead, like, does it still make sense to go ahead with it? And in some cases, like, yeah, it stung, I'm sure equally for both of us to like make a film and have it sit on a hard drive. And it's like, wow, like, and you don't want to waste anyone else's time who helped you. And like that weighs on you. And like, there's a lot, but at the same time, it's like, if that's what it takes to get to the next project and if you can use that as a positive stepping stone, that's all that matters. And then I think when you do finish and release something, that's when you really get to learn, because then you see how people are responding and you see how you feel, and like there's just this whole other side of it. It's just like we both are dads now, I guess, but it's like, if someone's pregnant and it's like having a baby when you make a movie, and it's like there's this like period of the growth and nobody sees it, and then it's born and it's in the world, and that is a whole other part of seeing your creativity through that lens that's so valuable to you as an artist. And that's the part you can only get when you release the film. So of course it's important to finish and release things, but it's also okay if you have to abandon something, if that's, like I said, if that's what it's going to take.
Yeah, totally. The metaphor holds, because you give birth to a film and then it just shits and vomits all over you. I kind of want to shift here and just in continuing to talk about like embracing limitations.
Yes.
So you embrace some major limitations on your most recent feature, Disappearing Boy, which if anyone, everyone should go listen to Noam's podcast. He did a podcast pretty recently talking about his production here. Now, you were a one-man crew
yes.
on this film, which is just wild. My first question, though, is did you have the idea for the story first, or did you have the idea to one man crew a movie and then write to those limitations?
So they both happened independently, and then I kind of connected them. So basically, I'd had this like kidnapping thriller idea in the back of my head for a while, like actually since my son was born, because it was sort of tapping into this like new emotional, like you're a father, and like you have to protect this kid now, and like all these things go through your mind, and it started sparking on these story ideas. So I just had that like in a drawer somewhere. And then separately, I had this project I wanted to do because another film I was trying to work on fell through, and I wanted to find something. And that another example, like I'd been writing something for like a year, raised money, like did everything. We lost a location, blah blah blah. It was like a force majeure situation, and the film didn't go through. And that was another like, well, do I just keep going, or is it the sunk cost bias where I just want to do it because I've spent all this time on it? So I just said, no, I'm going to do something different. The universe is pointing me in a different direction that is saying, maybe scale it down and do the thing you've always wanted to do, which is make a movie with no crew, because that would allow me so many benefits. It would give me the creative satisfaction of actually making that project. It would let me try a new filmmaking model that I could essentially experiment with and then share with filmmakers on my blog, which is a huge part of it for me, is like showing other filmmakers that they can do this as well. And then it was also that it would allow it to be more immediate and even more cost effective, because because of the way it shot, it wasn't just no crew, but it was spread over many months. So I was able to like write it as we went. I didn't need a full script to start. I had an outline, I had the first act, but we could basically just start shooting, right away. And I didn't have to cast it in a traditional way. Any shoot days were like very minimal expense, and I was just paying them out of pocket, like at random, because it's not like we're doing the whole movie like 3 weeks back to back and have to raise money for it or something. So it just made sense from a logistical standpoint, from a creative standpoint. And then I took this idea, like I said, in my back pocket, and I was like, oh, that's the one that could probably work in this model. So then I sort of built it from there, thinking about story and logistics kind of intertwined.
It's so badass. It's so badass, dude. I mean, like when I heard you first, or when I first read about you doing this, I was just like, wow, this is like a fantasy that it's just so cool.
But it's funny because I appreciate you feeling that way, but it actually was so easy comparatively to, and like, again, I don't want to gloss over how hard things can be as a creative or as a filmmaker, but like compared to other features I've made, like this was the easiest by far. And it was because when there's no crew, it's like some people picture it's a big film set and you're like one person running to tweak lights and then running over here to get the wardrobe and running. But it's like, no, that's not at all what it is. Once you're one person on the crew, everything is different. The whole movie is different. It's written different. It's shot different. You're so casual in the approach on set. It did not feel like we were making a movie. It felt like we were just sitting around talking about the scenes. And then before we knew it, my camera was out, and okay, let's try that idea. And we roll a couple takes, and then before we know it, we just shot the whole scene and came up with all these new ideas because it came out of a natural place. It wasn't, all right, actors, you wait here while the AD, gets the extras over there. And then I look with the DP through the lens and we get the perfect light. And then everybody sort of disconnected. It was just this organic, singular organism of, me and the 2 or 3 actors that would be there on a given day, just talking, filming, having lunch, and it became, it was so enjoyable. And it was, it had its moments where it was like difficult for sure, but nowhere near other films I've done. So it sounds hard, but I can tell people like it's, it doesn't have to be, I think there's a way to do it where it's not that complicated.
What were some of your first just kind of technical considerations about like, okay, I'm combining a camera department, a sound department. It sounds like you mostly use natural light, but some level of kind of grip work, and I'm going to put it all on my body, right?
Yeah.
Like, so sort of what were some of your priorities, and what did you decide to help help yourself also be a director while manning all of these different elements?
Yes. So I have a lot of gear that I already own. So at the time, I recently sold an Alexa, but at the time I had an Alexa cinema camera that I could have used. But I also had like my Fuji X-T4 and all these other cameras. But I went with the Fuji, which is I don't think I have it on my desk. I was going to show you now, but it's a very small mirrorless camera, and it was this decision for me of like, that was actually very symbolic of the whole approach to the movie, which is like, this is not about trying to do something because it's the right camera. Like anyone would say like, shoot the movie on Alexa. Okay, well, I'm not going to walk around outside in public with like a 40-pound Alexa on my shoulder, trying to pull focus on some lens that, and then I'm going to have to rent more support gear for it and blah, blah, blah. I'm going to take the camera that's easiest and most frictionless to shoot with, which I shoot with almost every day anyway, this Fuji X-T4. I know its strengths. I know its weaknesses. It's not perfect, but no camera is. I like the image on that. That's going to be my camera. I'm going to shoot on one lens because I want to do a even more severe limitation, avoid lens swaps, and just pick the one Leica R lens that I have that I really like. That's a 50 millimeter, put it on there. That's my camera kit. My lighting kit is like the sun and any light switches in a room that I might go into. And to me, that can look so much better than trying to recreate a Hollywood look when you only have, like one LED panel and then, some little hair light or something. And it just ends up looking like you're trying for something that's not working, as opposed to a purposeful, natural look. So yeah, natural light, X-T4 with one lens. I didn't even have a like a cage or any sort of rig on it. I just used the internal stabilization, which doesn't work perfectly, but it worked well enough for the way I was shooting with it. And then I had a tripod as well. And then my sound kit was just the Zoom H6 with a couple of like Rode wireless lav mics that went into it. And then, after we record, yeah, there you go, right there. So that was it. And, it depended, like if, oh yeah, here, this is the one we actually, I recorded the entire movie on this. So this was
H6 buddies.
And this still has like sand all like stuck to it from our beach day. Like it got pretty beat up, but it, yeah, it was like literally, I would have it in my backpack if we were in like on the beach or something. I'd lock it, I'd hit record, and I would just let it run constantly. And everything the actor said was going in there. And I just picked up the camera and I figured out the syncing later. And then when we were in a motel room or in like a house or something like that, then I would actually, stop and kind of like do a quick clap slate or something like that and do it take by take. But like most of the time, like outdoors, that was it. It was like my camera, this in a backpack, wireless mics, and we were just kind of running and gunning.
I love it. I love it. When you on your show, when you mentioned that you shot the whole thing on a 50 millimeter lens, I love it so much. It brought me back to when I was making my first movies with my GH4 on a Canon Nifty 50. The
I had that
plastic case 50 millimeter,
yeah.
And I didn't know what I was doing, so I just shot like entire like commercial commercial films, and then also my own shorts, all just on a 50 millimeter lens because I didn't know what I was doing. But it was really liberating to just not have to think about it. Now, for the last 5-6 years, like that would be unthinkable. How dare you just go to set with a 50 millimeter lens? Like plus especially if you have a crop factor on your camera.
Yeah.
But
yeah, exactly.
to then think about, you were just embraced that. I just thought it was so cool. And it brought me back to like my earliest days of
That's
filmmaking.
So funny. Yeah. Well, it's true. Because when you first start, like you don't even think about the lens. Or I started with like the DV cameras, like the DVX 100 mini DV, and like those just had like built-in zoom lenses. So I actually didn't I was filming for a few years before I even understood anything about focal lengths, because I was just like, or sensor sizes or anything. I was just like, oh, this is what it looks like if I go like that and zoom in, it looks bigger. And if I go like this, it looks smaller. Like that's all I knew. And then eventually I learned, okay, now I bought a GH1 or 2, or I guess GH2. And that's when I actually, around the time I started my blog, I was like learning about focal lengths and testing them on the different crop factors. And that's when I learned it all. But yeah, now it's like, for sure, if I'm going to a commercial set with a client, I'm not just going to have one lens unless that's what we agree upon. But for my own film, like, I just thought it was such a fun thing to try. And it did create some huge challenges, but I actually like how, like, the things that came out of that were really interesting. So, like, for example, there's a lot of scenes in the car. So a bunch of them I shot in the car with the 50 at the beginning, and they worked well, even though they were so tight. They were just like, it added this sort of grittiness, because normally you would just put on the 24 or whatever, but like, well, on the 50 it looks pretty, unique in that sense, because it's not the obvious choice. But then it became so difficult to shoot the dialogue scenes that way that we ended up doing a bunch of those on green screen, which you may have seen. I did like a blog article on how we put the,
Yes.
lit a green screen with natural light and shot the entire, like, all the driving dialogue scenes that way. And that let me, move the 50 way back, and I could then get, like, be shooting like through the window as opposed to like right up close in the car. And yeah, and then that created this whole thing that I learned about, like, oh, I should do like all my driving stuff on green screen on a micro budget. I'd rather have the money to have a process trailer and do it properly, but it's like safer and faster and less expensive to do it this way. So all of these sort of things came out of just like limiting to the one lens and then having to solve problems around that, as opposed to trying to solve your problems with lens. Like, normally you just be like, oh, we'll just keep driving around the block and I'll just put on the 24 and we'll do the dialogue. But I feel like we got way better dialogue now because we did it in a garage and it was controlled, and we didn't have to worry that we're going to crash the car or do something dangerous. So anyway, so yeah, it was helpful.
That's interesting. I would have thought that your decision to green screen the car would have come from an audio place, but you're saying that the initial impulse was actually to accommodate the lens.
Yeah. I mean, the
crazy.
audio would have been helpful, but I mean, that definitely made it cleaner. But yeah, it was because the hand holding that camera in a car, trying, like, if you picture being in the passenger seat on a 50 on a Super 35, it's like, yeah. And it was cool for a couple scenes, but I'm like, no, we can't shoot the whole movie like this. And the stabilization's not good enough at that focal length to deal with that sort of bumpiness. So yeah, it was one of those things. So there was all sorts of those technical things we had to sort out.
Now, with this incredible, exciting and free and freewheeling, production style for this film, did you have a plan in mind for distribution when you began?
No, not at all. And I know that's sort of like a bit against some of the advice I've given in the past, which is not necessarily to know what you're going to distribute, where you're going to distribute, but at least have like a ballpark of like, who is the film for and how are you going to market it. And I feel like I kind of thought about that a little bit, maybe now that you ask me. But it was very much secondary to just like, I need to make something. I haven't made something in like a few years. It's been like a pandemic and everybody's been, and then this other film didn't work out that I was trying to make. Like, I had this like craving to just like get out there and make something. And that like just took me into it so quickly that it wasn't until we were already like 4 months into the process that I started thinking about like, and looking at the footage and the edit and saying, okay, like, what is this turning into? And like, what might I do with it for distribution? So now I have some like ideas about that, which we can talk about. But yeah, at the time I didn't really know what I was doing.
That's very interesting. I'm curious. Yeah. What are you thinking distribution wise for this?
So I've thought a lot about how like the big challenge that films have is that they're made like indie films in terms of monetization, I should say. The challenge they have is that the average order value of a film is so low. So like most people watch an indie film on an SVOD platform like Amazon, and you're literally getting paid 1 cent per hour. So I think, I can't remember if I get the math right, but I think if it's like a 90-minute film and 100,000 people see your movie, you get like $3,000 or something like that. So like it's insanely bad. And then there's TVOD platforms like Apple where you can, put your movie up but nobody's really buying movies on there, especially indie movies, and you're up against the big blockbusters. And then the people that are getting it are probably renting it $2.99. Apple's giving you $2. So like when you crunch the numbers, you realize that like if you go through the traditional means, the only way to make money is by having like a mass audience, which is why the studio movies work out sometimes, because they have enough money to advertise to millions and millions of people. But like you need that level of volume when your product is worth like pennies or when it's worth $2. So my whole philosophy was, well, why don't I look for some ways to actually create a more premium experience around the film, and therefore get the average order value of the movie to closer to $50. So eventually there will be free versions where people can just watch it probably on YouTube or on Hulu or wherever it winds up. But before that, I want to do a window, a self-distribution window, where I create a mixture of premium in-person experiences like screening events where we have gear and we have live Q&As, and it's more of an event than just a movie screening. So a mixture of things like that with digital products where, I might have a premium filmmaker version that you could buy for $50 that you're not really buying the film. You're buying, the education behind the film. You're buying maybe access to, some of the assets that I created along the way, and director's commentary and this and that, almost like you would do for like Kickstarter perks, right? But I didn't crowdfund this. So instead of using the money to fund the movie from crowdfunding, it's almost like doing it after the fact and saying like, do you want to be one of the first people to see the movie, get early access, get all these other perks, or go to the in-person experience, or buy the, other related products? And then by doing that, if I sold like 100 of those, which would be very few, that would be more than, the movie would already break even because I made it for like $6,000, so if I sell like, 100 and change. So if there's 1,000 or 2,000 or 3,000, and then over time you can continue to sell these premium packages, then it becomes more sustainable. And then after that window, you can also put the film on whatever traditional platforms you want. Because at the end of the day, I don't want everyone to have to pay $50 to watch the movie. I want as many people to see it as possible, but I also want the movie to have some sort of better offer for the people that do want to dig deeper into it and do find that valuable, because that could mean funding for my next film. And then I can hopefully create more education around that film. So I'm just looking at ways to sort of tie that together. So I don't know for sure that I'm going to do that, but that's a strategy I've thought about recently. Because also I've been fortunate to sort of grow this audience over the years, and have a pretty substantial, email list now of filmmakers that I think would find it interesting. It's just an experiment I want to try, and we'll see, I guess, if it is profitable or not, but that's sort of where I've been going lately.
I think it's really cool. And I really like the idea. And I think because it's that weird thing about that I, think about as an independent filmmaker which is that how do you convince people to, want to pay for your work when I myself as a viewer, if you come up to me and you're like, hey, like there's this movie, like it's by somebody you've never heard of before. There's no one you've ever heard of in it. And like, that's it, that's it. And I'm like, I'm not going to spend 2 hours of my life watching this movie. And like, even though that's the very thing I'm trying to create, you know what I mean? Like,
exactly.
It's this weird disconnect there. But one of the things that I've gotten a lot of value from doing the historical side of this podcast and learning about, filmmakers throughout history is that it was never really like that. There's always these value added propositions or cultural zeitgeists that are elevating certain films above others.
Exactly.
Or the roadshow experience of a film traveling from city to city and creating that experiential thing that made all the films that we now just like, oh yeah, they just got plugged into the theater system and off they went. No, that's not how it happened.
Yeah.
And so that these sort of inventive ideas to how to bring that experiential element into the real world on an independent level, I think is really exciting and really cool, because we're still in this brave new world of distribution that no one's really figured out yet.
Yeah. And no, you bring up such a great point. You articulated that really well, because I was gonna try to share something similar before and I got off track, but I've been thinking a lot about how, yeah, it's really about, like, let's look at film festivals. Like, what do they do for a filmmaker? It just adds legitimacy. If you get into Sundance, and then if you, let's say, win an award, then you, not to say like there aren't still challenges with distribution, but now that you have all of this leverage, because there is a demand, even if there's no star in the movie, the festival becomes the star, or someone might have like a big name producer see their movie and they say, okay, put my name on as executive producer. There has to be some element to elevate it. And for me, I feel like, okay, I can't rely on film festivals. I hope to screen, like we're doing a, hopefully festival run soon with this movie, but you don't know where you're going to get in. Even if filmmakers that get into Sundance one year, like never get in again sometimes. So it's like, there's no guarantee about that. So how, and my films are so low budget that, I'm not relying on having an A-list actor who's then going to go promote the movie and elevate it. So it just comes down to, like, how do I then create that for the film myself? If I can't rely on festivals or, certain level of actor or whatever, I have to rely on myself to build an audience for this movie. And that's why I spend the majority of my life like making, online education for filmmakers and blogs and all this, because I want them to learn. But then my hope is that when I have a film to release every so many years, a handful of those filmmakers, which is all I really need, is to come along with me and watch the movie. And then it becomes something that allows me to continue that cycle going. So not everybody's going to have to do it exactly the way that I did it by any means. There's so many ways to do it, but I do think you can, think of it from that perspective, and there could be some benefits there.
Would you shoot a single man crew film again?
Yeah, I would. I was thinking about it yesterday, because I'm in this weird lull where, like, I finished editing that Disappearing Boy. I have this other film I just wrote, Teacher's Pet, that we're shooting this summer, and there's like a 1 or 2 week period where I'm not really working on anything that creative right now, and it's very like disorienting for me when I'm in that like phase. So yesterday my mind was just racing, and yeah, I was thinking of, like, all these one-man band movies I could do. So I should be thinking about like what's on my to-do list, which is like, I have a bigger movie that's already, like, I have a deck for and I have written out as a treatment. I should be like working on developing that. But I had so much fun doing it that it makes me want to just do it again, for no other reason than it's just enjoyable.
Oh, that's so cool. That's amazing. Were there any lessons that you learned on Disappearing Boy that have then transferred over to Teacher's Pet?
Yeah, I think that for me, the natural light and stuff, and just keeping it as small as I did. I think, like, on Teacher's Pet, there is a budget and we will have a crew, but I'm gonna try to keep it as small as possible. Like, I might even shoot that movie with a 3-person crew, even though we could afford to have more people there, because I want to force us to, treat it like we're shooting a documentary. I'd say, like, the biggest thing that worked was about halfway through, I realized, like, oh, I'm just making a documentary film. And it's like, everyone thinks directing is about control, but I think it can be about also, like, relinquishing that control and being an observer of what's going on, and then just knowing how to edit and refine and capture what it is in the moment. And so that transcended, like, working with the actors, for example. In the past, I might, like, I wouldn't say micromanage, but like, okay, let's go through the scene, let's talk about this line and let's tweak that. And this time I was like, no, like, I trust these actors. We've talked about the scene all morning. Let me see what they do. And I'm just going to sit here and just document it as if I'm just a documentarian. And then, of course, there's like a little bit of nudging here and there if I have an idea, but it was about that. Or like, okay, what does the light look like today? How can we work with that? So I think a lot of times people say on a film set, like, everything that can go wrong will go wrong. But that's because we have this predetermined vision of what's going to happen in a world that is completely, out of our hands. Like we think it's going to be a sunny shot at the beach, but it rains that day or whatever. So that's only a problem if it has to be a sunny day at the beach. But if you're going there and you're saying, this has to be, we're going to collaborate with the elements. If it rains, like that's going to be part of the scene and that's going to make it better. Then you don't see those things as like problems, they become opportunities. So yeah, I think for me, seeing it that way, keeping things really minimal, that's definitely something I'm going to carry forward.
Are you working with the DP on the project?
Yeah, I'm planning to. I've gone back and forth. I'm planning to, and I have someone in mind. And we're trying to discuss like availability and stuff. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. Like, if it didn't work out, like there is a version where I might shoot it myself. But I'm open to sort of both options, really. And I'm starting to feel, especially as I make more and more films, that like I don't want to ever try to recreate what I did on another film. If I do DP this, like it's not going to be because I did it on the last one. It's just going to be because that's the right thing for this project, because every movie is different, and you don't want to impose like certain thing just because it worked before, right? When there might be some newer thing. So yeah, I'm trying to just continually kind of evolve.
You mentioning about the filmmaker's illusion of the need to control various things that are outside of our control. I was thinking back in like my historical lens of like, oh, I guess this kind of, maybe it's somewhere rooted like in the old studio system when films were shot under a completely controlled environment.
Mm-hmm.
And then in the new Hollywood era, those things kind of got shaken up and everybody came in and shook things up. And then I was kind of playing the tape forward and it's like, well, in today's environment where like most big Hollywood movies are shot like on a green screen, like everything's green screened, and it is like completely within our control, and we're only getting more control with like the advent to AI that is going to continue to change our media. It's just so strange how these ideas from other places we then as independent filmmakers can then latch onto and be like, well, that's how you do it, that's what I need.
Exactly.
And it doesn't necessarily have to be that way.
And actually, like if you go really far back to the beginning, like the silent film era was more like micro budget filmmaking than anything. Like it was just complete like chaos. And even I read a lot about like Hitchcock and other directors, but like I read this book and he was talking about like some of his early silent films, and they literally sound like micro budget productions where he was doing the makeup himself on the actors, and like movies that we now love or that are like timeless were made that way. And then yeah, you look at the control factor, and like there's no matter what, like even on these big studio productions, they can have control over the light and they can have their LED screens and they can dial in this and that, but like they don't have control over the actor that got food poisoning last night, or they don't have control over like somebody's in a bad mood, somebody there's just so many things, like somebody shows up late, like and just being able to roll with the punches is something that is not only important but is I think more realistic on a smaller scale, because these big productions are such machines that if something goes off the rails, it's like, oh, so and so didn't show up today, so we can't shoot, so everybody go home because there's no other option. But okay, one of my actors didn't show up today, all right, I have another friend I can call. I'm going to call and see if he can come over and be in the scene, or let's shoot another scene. Let's write a scene on the spot and go shoot that. Like, you're not going to do that in Universal on some like massive stage. So, that's, and not to say that like one is better or worse. They're just completely different things. And I think like for me, I'm more excited by the movies, like especially when I look at older films, like the ones that stand the test of time are usually not the ones where they're like playing with like the most cutting edge VFX of that day that end up looking terrible like 10 years later. It's usually like Cassavetes filming a movie in his house with his like friends and family, and it being this like mess that ends up being this like most beautiful piece of art that people love, and that to me is just more exciting. But that also doesn't mean that's better. That's just my kind of point of view.
Absolutely. Well, it's certainly one that I share. Now, you also run the Backlot, which is a filmmaking community and incubator that filmmakers can join. And I was reading on your website that you've dedicated 2023 to guiding members to make feature films of their own, following your sort of low budget DIY model. And this is very exciting because I'm, as we mentioned, I'm working on my first feature right now
Yeah.
in pre-production, and I was just kind of curious. I wanted to kind of let you give you a little pitch of what my film is and
Yes,
tell you a little bit
please.
about it, what we're thinking, and just kind of like give a chance to pick your brain here a little bit. As to maybe some things that you might think of that I haven't thought of because I haven't done
Absolutely.
it before.
Yeah, I'd love to hear it.
So this is a feature film. It's called Withdrawal, and it's about a codependent couple of heroin addicts who must endure a night of withdrawal in order to get prescribed a medicine that they hope will cure their addiction. And it follows them over the course of a single night as they try to hold on to their love that has been totally eaten away by heroin. Um, it is a micro budget film, and I'm shooting it in my hometown of Athens, Georgia, where I have kind of all my favors saved up to
Yeah.
help make this happen. Um, I'm shooting, the production budget is $40,000. I'm currently rehearsing with my lead actors and filling out the crew. And one of the elements of this story is, which is from my personal experience, having gone through drug withdrawal a long time ago, is the worst part of it is, yes, the physical part is terrible, but the worst part is the mental side of it. And because you keep going back in the past and wondering, how the hell did I get here? How did I do this to myself? And you're thinking back to the whole story of how you got here. And it felt like an organic story-based opportunity to use a device of flashbacks to try to tell the story of this couple as to how they got here. So our shoot is going to be divided into two periods. We're shooting the flashback scenes at the end of August, beginning of September. And then we're going to reconvene at the end of October, beginning of November to shoot our like a storyline. And that's the plan right now.
That's awesome. Well, first of all, that sounds amazing, and for like so many reasons, because great story, important like themes and message and everything you're going to talk about, but it's also coming from a personal place. So it's a real, there's so many people that want to make films about subjects like this that don't have the experience, but they think it's going to be cool, or like a topic that's going to be edgy, and you can always tell when there's like a real world experience behind something like this, and there has to be. So I think that like it's a great idea for a movie. It's amazing for a micro budget film. It's amazing that like at least for that one component of it, you can contain it all in like that one night for half of the movie basically, which is going to make it, like from the foundations of what you said, I would say like this is probably a perfect setup for a micro budget film. I think that like it just comes down to then, because you're already like well on your way. So it's not about, okay, how do we like think foundationally about like what needs to change. It's more about how do we kind of bring out the best qualities of what you're already doing. So obviously the script is always like crucial, and I'm sure you've been working on that a lot. But what about yeah, tell me more about like the flashback type stuff, because is that sort of like almost a Blue Valentine, where it's like we're seeing past and present, which I love that movie.
Yeah, definitely. I think that is a pretty good modern comp. Yes, it is. This is like a personal story. It's taken me 10, I've like been writing like addiction content for like 10 years, and it never felt right. And it literally took me 10 years to realize like, oh wait, like I actually lived like a pretty good like micro budget like
Yeah,
single
an
night like
arc.
single location arc.
Yeah,
And the thing that I really like about it is that it's yes, it's a story about addiction, but at its core it's a love story that hinges on a single question: will they or won't they end up together? And so I structured the flashback beats around those kind of quintessential genre beats of the love story of boy meets girl, boy gets girl, boy loses girl, whatever. So trying to just shape the beats around to answer those questions of the genre, the kind of like the genre form. So that was their structure. And I guess one of the other things that's very hard about telling an addiction story is, number one, like the objective is like not very dynamic because the objective is just drugs. You know what I mean? It's like that's kind of lame for like crafting a story sometimes. And number two, like really allowing the audience to like hook into the character of like why would they care? Like where's the heart?
No, but you know what? I don't mean to cut you off, but I think that you can sympathize and empathize with that character, because I think it's how it's presented. Like, I think if it comes across as just mindless like drug use, that's one thing. But if it comes across as like, we understand like it's not about taking drugs, it's about escaping pain, or it's about like getting away from something, that whatever it is, right? That's that, I don't know the story, but the more that it feeds into that, then of course you empathize with them, and you might even want them to get the drugs at some point, right? Because if you're like, hey, like I've watched I can't remember exact example, but I've watched plenty of things where there have been someone who's like addicted to drugs, and so addicted that like if they don't get it, like they'll die, or they'll have like such severe withdrawal, and like you want to see them out of their misery, so like you want them to get the drug, just even temporary. You're like, hey, we'll figure out how to get off this later, but like you need something. So I don't think that I wouldn't worry about like, are the characters likable or relatable or anything like that. Like one of my favorite movies of all time is Requiem for a Dream, which is, I'm sure, a lot like different than what you're doing. But these are characters that like, I never went through anything like that, but I could still see myself in them in a lot of ways. And I still felt like, empathy toward them. So I wouldn't worry about that. Like, I think that like I would only worry about that if you weren't who you are and you didn't have your own experience with it, because then it might come off as, it would be lacking that depth. But I think you're naturally going to put that into it. And it seems like that's something you're cognizant of.
Yeah. I appreciate that. And it's also really valuable to hear that from like like someone who like didn't go through this, but like, could watch Requiem and be like, oh yeah, I see myself.
Oh, totally. And I had friends that did go, I've seen it pretty up close, and I get it. And like, I think most people have. It's something that's so important, and like, there can't be enough, it's like a lot of topics or stories or historical events where like, we can keep going back there because there's so many more angles to tell it from, and because they're still relevant today to so many people, that we need to find fresh ways of kind of you breathing new life into these things that can help people. And I'd say like, I mean, my only question is like, because you do have a decent budget, what's your plan? Like, how are you planning on kind of allocating your budget, and are there any issues on that regard, or any other that I could sort of advise on? Because it seems like I said, if I was working on this, I'd be like, I don't see any issues so far. It's looking pretty like a pretty great launching off point.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that I'm wrestling with right now is, because I do have the benefit of this budget, but at the same time, I'm also committed to that sort of documentary feel that you were talking about with Disappearing Boy, that was like necessitated by a much more limited budget. And how do I communicate that to my collaborators? How do I stay true to that within myself? And this does kind of get into one of the technical decisions I've made between the like a storyline and then the flashback beats, which is that my plan is to shoot the flashbacks on like, a sort of prosumer cinema camera, whether it's my Blackmagic 6K, or potentially we might have access to like a Blackmagic Ursa or something like that. And then, but what I'm committed to for the A storyline is I want to shoot this on Digital 8 camcorders, which is a medium I use a lot, that I like mess around with a lot.
I have an old one. Yeah,
dude. I've got hold on. I've got my bad boy right here. This camera is so silly. They actually built like a Polaroid dispenser.
Oh, are you serious?
I don't think they make the film for it anymore, but you can literally put Polaroid film in here, and it
I remember
spits out a slot.
That's like hilarious. Yeah, it'll just do like a screenshot. and it'll print
Yeah,
it.
it's
It's so
so
funny.
funny.
I
Like,
have one that's probably even older than that. It doesn't have the Polaroid thing, but it's yeah, that's cool though. I love that. That's amazing.
and so like I love the medium, and I want that feeling of like every time you go out of a flashback, which like will look, kind of big and probably be 16 by 9, whatever, and then you're pushed back into the like tight
Yeah,
aspect ratio, gritty standard definition image,
yeah.
desaturated color, and you'll just feel like, oh, this is gross.
Yes. I love it because then that makes everything like that solves so many other things because once you do that, then again, like lighting, if the lighting is not perfect, that's great. That's better. Like it would look weird if it had perfect 3-point lighting and then you're trying to make it look like this like camcorder style. So that's actually gonna, I think, lend itself well. And I think like in terms of keeping it like that, if that's what you're sort of wrestling with is like how do you keep that like spirit of very DIY, very simple? I think there's like a few ways to do it. I think there's one is like, I don't know how big you're planning on having your crew, but like I would rather have like much fewer people on set, like literally like the most skeleton crew that you could possibly have, and pay those people better as opposed to like having double the amount of people that you don't need there. So I would think of it that way. I would also think of like the people that you're hiring, just making sure that they are like of the mindset of being kind of a jack of all trades, because that's what these films need. Or like, like on my next film, I don't even know if most of the roles will be defined as like, I mean, like the DP might be, but like the sound recordist might just be like person A who is recording sound, but also dealing with wardrobe and also responsible for X, Y, or Z. And then there might be another all around jack of all trades that is dealing with a whole other set of tasks, So I think there's a way of crewing it up where it's less about like, okay, you're the DP, you're the sound recordist, you're this. It's just like, no, we're a few people making a movie. There's a lot of things. We're all going to be sharing hats. Like generally, this falls on you, this falls on me. And I think communicating that up front, if you haven't already like hired a crew, it'll attract the right crew. If you have hired a crew, then I think it'll just help them understand what they're working with. And then I would say, like, if you have money left over, like, or you have the ability, the other thing you could do is just instead of being tempted to say, okay, well, we've got an extra few $1,000, so why don't we just pad our crew, or why don't we have more this or that? That might be an opportunity to, I don't know if there's any rules in there for like a name actor or something like that, but like if that is something that's important to you and you can have, there's somebody in a scene that is like a recognizable actor that you want to work with and that you can offer a reasonable rate to, like that can go so far in terms of reaching more people. It's something that like I've never really done on my films. I having to probably on this next film because it's already distributed. But if that's something for you, even that's just distribution aside, that's like personally exciting, where there's like, oh, there's like these few actors that might be local to that area that like you really want to work with, and there's a scene or two that they could do and you could offer them a good rate. Like I think there's a lot of ways that you can spend the money on a indie film, and some go a lot further than others, and sometimes like it doesn't actually benefit you to spend in certain ways, and it could, if anything, detract. So yeah, I would just keep it, keep it small, keep the communication clear. And if there's extra money, just be creative with where it's spent, as opposed to just assuming you have to dump it right back into just making it feel bigger.
That's really helpful to hear, and because I've never had this much money to work with on a project before, and so I'm incredibly grateful for that. And that sort of that aspect of being both a recruiter and like team leader and like collaborator and like bringing people in and communicating the vision effectively. It's like I've actually I've actually stolen one of your lines. There's like a podcast that you did a few weeks ago, and you were talking about approaching people to work on a small budget, and you were like, yeah, I'm not trying to be anybody I'm not. And you said, I used the line, here's all the reasons why you shouldn't work on this film.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
I actually have stolen that recently.
That's so funny.
as approaching people with this. But no, I mean, so far we haven't finalized anything, but like I've been talking to people who are excited. But I think it's a natural inclination from a lot of different departments to try to like level up or get things that they feel like they need. And it's hard saying no. It's hard saying
Yeah.
like, no, like we need to keep this pared down and simple, because you don't want to disappoint people. You don't want,
Yes.
so like,
I think if you look for those people, though, it doesn't have to be as hard, because I think you'll eventually, it might take longer to find them, but I think eventually you'll find the people that get it. So like on my film, Josh, who's the lead actor, the reason I wanted to work with him is not only was he a great actor, but he also is a filmmaker, and he's made his own DIY films, and some of them with like basically no crew. So it was like, okay, he gets it. He's not going to be sitting there on set wondering like, is this going to look like garbage because there's no crew? And like, then why am I giving 110%? Like,
yeah,
so it's like the same philosophy would go to if I was kind of casting my crew, so to speak, where I would want to make sure that like, it's really not about their skill. It's like, yes, of course, if you're recording audio, I want you to know like the difference of a shotgun mic and like a lab wireless mic, but like, you don't have to. I'd rather take the person who's passionate about the idea and who wants to give 110% than the person that has better gear but just doesn't really want to be there, and they have a bit more experience, but like it doesn't matter because they're lazier. Like I've had people that I've brought onto micro budget sets, that like one sound guy in particular who like had only done these like very, very huge productions, and we, paid him well for the day, but like he just he was sort of not, he just wasn't the right fit, and he didn't he made a lot of choices that actually were like very negatively impacted the audio, even though like we treated him well, and we were happy to have him there. So I would have much rather had somebody who's like just fresh out of film school, but is like, no, this is an opportunity. I want to work with new people. I'll go the extra mile. If I screw something up, I'll do it again. No, it's like, I think it's more about having people that will, because there's so much also that like just mentally that weighs on you when you're making a film, and it makes it 10 times harder if the people that you're surrounded with are also second guessing everything that you're doing. And not that people can't push back. You want people to be able to say like that they have a better idea, or that like or just offer up their opinion, but in a way that is serving like the overall purpose of the project, as opposed to like, no, that's not how it's done. And like, just because some other filmmaker did it this way that you heard about, or this person did it that way, like that doesn't mean that's how it's done. Well, it's not how it's done, but like maybe that's how this movie is getting done, and there are people that will want to do it that way. So I think you just have to find them.
Yeah, that it does. You did kind of like hit upon like an essential tenet of this project, which is that like I have watched so many projects of other people that I know, of people that I care about, who I think are incredibly talented, and I've had projects of my own die on the vine out of that sense of like, oh, like we've got to level up, or like you get so focused on like leveling, well, we gotta raise the money to get this like great sound guy, or like we can't do it without the sound guy, or we can't do it without this. I mean, I guess this is what I was talking about earlier with the like, if only I had XYZ. And like my commitment to this film is that like we work with what we have, like, and we embrace what we have, and don't try to get caught in that cycle of, if only, yeah, we could just get this, which I think is easier for me to embrace when it's like the script or the elements or the actors. But when it came to like finding crew members, it was a sort of a new territory for me. And all of a sudden that interpersonal dynamic kind of like, which has just been feeling like a lot, I guess.
Yeah, no, I get that. And I think most crew, like 99% of crew probably wouldn't be a fit for something like this. So I think as you're talking to people and having discussions, like, you're going to just come across the majority of people that rightfully so probably would push back on things from their perspective, not really fully understanding. But again, it's nobody's right or wrong. It's like they just see it a different way. They want to be working on a different type of project, and they might not know your potential yet, but you know it. So like you have to find the people that believe in it. And sometimes, those are like literal. It could be, because when you break down like what you actually need, you said you own a Blackmagic camera. Like I'm going to guess you could probably shoot well and get some beautiful footage if you had to, but you can also find someone that you can work with where it's like, you might not even have a traditional DP on a movie. I'm not saying yours, but like just to open up the conversation, like you might have somebody who is a more of a camera operator or first AC, you might want to DP it, but you say, look, I can't hold the camera the whole time and deal with the actors. So why don't we share camera duties? And whatever you credit them as or not is up to you guys. But it's really about like, it's less formal, and you attract people when it's less formal that are less from that like professional, like, no, the call she has to look like this, I have to show up at this time. And at a $40,000 budget, even though like it's a lot of money, especially for a first film to work with, but for people used to working on like $1 million projects, nothing's going to ever feel like enough anyway. It's never going to feel like they're on some big set. So yeah, I think just try to look out for that, especially with like DPs. For anyone listening to this might be helpful, but there's so many DPs that are amazing, and rightfully so. Like, they want their best work to show. So that might mean pushing for more gear rentals, more time, more lighting, more days, blah, blah, blah. And they're only trying to do what's best, for the film and for them. But again, if it's a film like this that actually might, especially in the DP department, that's a common thing where it can just become very unwieldy very quickly, because you trust your DP and you want it to look good. So when they tell you you got to spend extra money on this lens package, like, you do it, but then that means more insurance. And then that means also better lights for that package. And then that means another day of prep to go and pick up the lights. And then it just explodes. So like, always be careful about it, but especially in the camera department, like, that's where things can really start to spiral. I think at the very minimum, if you get a DP or a camera assistant or whoever it is that gets what you're doing, that will be like 80% of the battle.
Totally. That's great. Yeah, thank you. I really appreciate, your insight.
Of course. Yeah. I mean, it's always, the only last thing I'll say is like, yeah, these are all different. So like, take my advice or anyone else's, but also, just find your own path as you will with it, because no two movies are alike, and like, nobody's figured it out. So like, I think at a certain point you just have to go with your gut and do what you think is best for your production, work with the people that you think are the best fit. But yeah, I'm excited to see it. It sounds like such a cool concept, and yeah, I'm really excited to, especially after this discussion, to hopefully be a champion of it moving forward. And we'll turn the tables. You'll come on my podcast and promote it sooner than later.
It'd be amazing.
Yeah. So no, it's cool, man. I'm excited for you.
Thank you so much. Well, let me wrap this up. It's with a 2-part question for you.
Sure.
Okay. Part 1, when you look to the future, what do you think is the biggest obstacle facing independent filmmaking as a profession, as an art form?
Okay. Biggest obstacle is probably going to be at just getting attention, because on your work, because there's so many people that are fighting for attention right now. You think about when movies came out, like in 1992 or whatever, out of Sundance, like, there was only so many movies made that year. And that was already way more than in the 60s or 50s. Now there's like tens of thousands of movies. And you're also competing with video games and with Apple VR headsets and with like, social media and TikTok and all these other things. So like, the attention of people is split, and is only going to be split more and more and more. So the biggest challenge, I think, for filmmakers or people that own film production companies and represent multiple titles, is just going to be finding a way to get that attention of the audience. And yeah, I mean, there's no easy answers there, but that's something to certainly keep your eye on, I would say.
Yeah, well, but it can also inspire creative solutions like, you're thinking about potentially doing. And that's really cool. And that pushes the art form forward, which I love.
I hope. Yeah. I mean, that's the hope. And I think there will be new models, especially now as we're seeing streaming kind of showing the true colors of people aren't really getting paid that much. Like, the companies aren't necessarily always like that profitable or for the right reasons. And I think there's going to be some like major shifts in the kind of like tech behind a lot of these streaming platforms that had served us temporarily, but are kind of running out of gas and not sustainable in the long term. So I'm hoping from that, whatever happens as a result of that will, benefit the lower budget filmmakers in some way, and create a model where like, yeah, people on all levels are able to reach audiences. And I think there are paths for that.
Totally. All right. Well, here's part 2 of the question.
Yes.
when you look to the future of independent filmmaking, what makes you the most excited?
So I would say I'm most excited by, um, I guess like the first thing that comes to mind is just like all of the amazing films I'm going to get to see that wouldn't have been able to be made even 10 years ago because of the lack of gear, the lack of funding. I talk often about this filmmaker Hong Sang-soo, who makes films for like $50,000 to $100,000, and they all go to big festivals, and like, he's super innovative, and I feel like we're going to see so much more of that. We're starting to see $10,000 movies that are getting theatrical releases and getting written up in Variety and all over the place. And that again was like unheard of, and it's still unusual, but I think it's going to become more and more realistic, and we're going to see more of it. So I'm excited to see those movies, and I'm excited to hopefully be a part of that ecosystem and put my own films into the world in that way, and not feel like just because it was done on a certain budget, it can't reach a lot of people. It can't even be seen theatrically. It can't go to a certain festival. Like, I think the floodgates are sort of opening, even though there's a lot of competition, and there's a lot of, if you even want to think of it that way, there's a lot of other films being made. Hopefully there's going to be enough room kind of for everyone.
I love that. Well, the last thing I just want to say here before we sign off is that there's this idea of service, like of doing service, like to an art form, to your peers.
Mhm.
And I think in the story that we have of ourselves as filmmakers, or filmmakers in general, there's this notion of like, once I'm famous, once I have the money, then I can donate to charity, or then I can be like Martin Scorsese and like be a film restorer or whatever.
Yeah.
And very seldom is that notion of service like really rolled into sort of like on the way up and like as
Yes.
you go. And this is something that I think you exemplify. And I think that it is a very rare quality and an amazing principle. And I guess I just want to thank you for that.
I appreciate that. Yeah.
The service you have done has helped me immeasurably. And just from the bottom of my heart, thank you. Thank you for your years of work.
That means a lot. I really appreciate that. I actually didn't think of it ever in that context, but I do think that I feel like every filmmaker has a duty at the very least to themselves to make films and to make art, because I think even if you do nothing else but that, you are contributing to the evolution of cinema and what's possible, and what people, you can make a film that 10 people watch, but one of those people, it might change their life, or it might inspire them to make a film based on your technique that opens up a whole new genre. So like, I think that, creating art is something that we all need to do just to get better at our craft, but also to kind of further the craft. And then beyond that, I think sharing what like for me, it's just, I just want to share the things that I wish somebody told me, because I could have saved years of my life if somebody, just, or at least like years of stress of like worrying about things that I had no control over, that I wish somebody just told me, or like just understanding like the element of luck in filmmaking, and how like, yes, you have to work hard, but there is a right place, right time thing too. And a lot of what we do is a gamble on every level, and knowing that, like, not just like guessing that, but actually knowing that firsthand. Like, I want to share that. Like, I'm just motivated to share that stuff with people, because again, I see people sometimes like write things online that say, I didn't get into such and such film festival, like I'm going to quit filmmaking. And like, I'm just like, these people probably didn't even watch your movie, So I just, when I see things like that, it just makes me want to help, because I was that person and still am. Yeah, I think if we can all help each other and be honest about what's actually going on, like, I try to share, like, if a film I make doesn't make a lot of money, like, I tell people. I'm not going to try to pretend it made $1 million if it didn't. I want people to know the realities of distribution. So, I always respect other filmmakers like yourself who are sharing your process. And I learned a lot from this discussion, just as you did. So yeah, I appreciate you having me on, and you asked great questions, and this was a lot of fun.
Yeah, man. Hey, what do you have coming up that people should be on the lookout for?
Yeah, so I have my Disappearing Boy will hit some festivals soon. I don't know exactly when and where we're navigating that now. But we'll also have Teacher's Pet out sometime next year. But if people want to follow along, they can go to my newsletter, noamkroll.com, noamkroll.com/newsletter. And then, that's also the URL for my blog, and you can find my podcast and Instagram, Twitter, all that stuff on there. But otherwise, hopefully we'll do a round 2 of this. So I'll have you one day on the podcast, and we'll continue the discussion. But this was a good starting point.
Man, I can't wait. I'll have links to all that stuff down in the show notes. So if you're a filmmaker and you are not following Noam Kroll, dude, what are you doing? Get on it. Okay. Noam, thank you so much. And I'll be back next week with more of my own filmmaking journey on this project. And until then, that's a wrap.
Buckle up a shoe, then she shouted hallelujah. And girl began to move, then she moved on down by. And Josephine crying glory, hallelujah. I've been redeemed cause I done my duty. I got on my traveling shoes, traveling shoes, traveling shoes, traveling shoes, traveling shoes, traveling shoes, I saw traveling shoes, traveling shoes, traveling shoes, traveling shoes, traveling shoes, traveling